Hey, I'm Sarah Garner, and this is my screencast talking about my student teaching experience. Going into student teaching, I sort of felt like I already knew everything I needed to know in order to be a successful educator, and I was very, very wrong. Throughout this semester, I've learned so much about myself and my different teaching styles. Um, Going into it, I had a lot of trouble with classroom management because I knew that I needed to be firm, but at the same time, I wanted the students to really like me. But I quickly learned that in order to allow the students to be involved and learn, there has to be order in the classroom and you have to be firm. And so I developed a lot of different classroom management styles, and that was really, really important and really helpful. For my 2-week unit, I did plants. And I knew that in order to get all of the lessons that I needed for my unit, I had to tie plants into basically every subject area. And for most of these subjects, it was easy for me to integrate plants into, but the hardest one for me was math. So I really had to dig deep and get really creative on on math lessons that integrated plants. Here's one of my lessons that I did. It's a math lesson. Um, I this lesson happened on a Friday, and throughout the whole week, students had been doing different math lessons that did involve plants, but this one sort of brought everything that they learned together. So for this one, students were given a half sheet of paper that looked like this, and they were split into different groups. And the groups were about 4 or 5, I believe. Each group had about 4 or 5 students. And in each group, there was a strong reader. There was a student who was relatively good at math, and then there were students who were a little bit lower in their math skills. So I really thought about the different groups and how they can work together and help one another. But each student, like I said, each student got a half sheet of paper that looked like this, and each part is labeled sun, soil, water, and air. And these are obviously all of the things that plants need. And so what I did in the beginning of the lesson was I showed the students this video, and I'm going to play it, if it will play.
Plants. For a plant to stay alive, it needs 5 things I would not lie. It needs water so it can grow. And it needs soil just like so. Plants need space, they can't be tight. The sun helps plants by giving light. Don't forget to give plants air. Repeat the needs if you dare. Need 1, water. Need 2, soil. Need 3, space. Need 4, light. Need 5, air.
So the students watched that. We all watched that together. And after watching that video, we had a discussion and we wrote the things on the board that plants need. And there were 5 things. The 5th thing was space. And we sort of talked about how obviously that's important, but the main 4 things that a plant needs is sun, soil, water, and air. So after discussing that is when I handed them their half sheets and put them into their groups. So there were 4 different tables for each different math center, and the tables were labeled. So there was the table that said sun, there was a table that said water, and then there was soil and air. And so what students did was throughout this week, they were working on math problems that we said if they were true or false or not. So for example, air had 1 + 9 = 8 + 2, and students had to determine if these two equaled the same things. And so if they did, it was true, and if it did not, it was false. And so 9 plus 1, they had to work together to understand is 10. And then 8 plus 2, they had to work together to realize that it was 10. And so then they would go back to their half sheet and they would find the section that was labeled air. So they would find this section and then they would work it out on this part of this blank space. They would work it out to show their work, and then they would circle if it was true or false. And so then after about 10 minutes at each station, I would have them rotate. And so they would rotate to the right, and they would do the same thing for each section. This lesson worked out really well because the students liked being in small groups. They liked being able to rotate to different centers, and I was able to go to each center and talk to them one-on-one. So this lesson worked out so well, I ended up doing another lesson the next week. It was the lesson that I did the next week was the lesson I did on a Friday. And we had the way that it looked was the half sheet at the bottom here, water and air did not have true or false, but sun and soil did. And so I had different math problems for sun and soil that were very similar to these problems. So we had sun and soil that had math problems that looked like that. But for water and air, for the water section, I had Unifix cubes that were put together, and we pretended that it was a stem and a root. And the stem section had 4 green blocks, and the root section had 2 brown blocks. And so the students had to say 4 plus 2 and then figure it out using the Unifix cubes. Then they flipped it around and said, well, if 4 plus 2 equals 6, then 2 plus 4 also equals 6. And so they did that for the water section. And then for the air section, I had 2 different plates. And in one plate, I had black beans, and then in the other plate, I had sunflower seeds. And there were 4 black beans and 5 sunflower seeds. So the students would say 4 plus 5 equals 9. And then they would flip the plates around and say, well, if 4 plus 5 equals 9, then 5 plus 4 also equals 9. And so again, they worked that out together, and they showed their work on the blank pieces on the paper. And so this way I could again walk around to each student and help them when they needed help. And then when they turned in their papers, I could see how they worked it out and how well they understood the concept of this. And so that was one lesson that I did that I felt turned out really well. And then I did a lesson called Save the Pumpkin Patch. And this week we went to Miller's Pumpkin Patch in Albemarle on a field trip. But before we did that, I did several lessons, and we made up a pumpkin patch. And so we all put our heads together and we thought of a name for our pumpkin patch, and we called it Miss Cord's Pumpkin Patch. And so we wrote it big on the board, and we were thinking of different ideas about our pumpkin patch and how big we wanted the pumpkins and things like that. And so after we discussed this, I told the students that we woke up one morning and there was trash all in our pumpkin patch. And we needed to think of different ways to help save the pumpkin patch. And so what we did first was we read a book called Landon's Pumpkins. And this book discussed how to reuse, reduce, and recycle. And after we read the book, we discussed why it's important to do that and what you need to do to reduce, reuse, and recycle. And so then we talked about, we brought it back to our pumpkin patch, and we talked about how our pumpkin patch has trash in it and how that's not healthy for the pumpkins and how we need to help rescue the pumpkins and keep them alive. And so all of the kids, I put the kids in groups of 2 and 3, and they worked together to make posters to save the pumpkin patch. And they were really creative. A lot of them just drew pictures of pumpkins, but other kids drew pictures of the pumpkin patch with trash all in it. And then I had them write several sentences why it's important to recycle and why we need to do that. And so I thought that was a really fun lesson. And then after they worked together to make their posters, they got up in front of the class and they explained why we need to recycle and why it's important. And so then later on that day, we have at 1:30 we have writer's workshop. And so for writer's workshop, I had them write a pretend letter to the paper, talking about our pumpkin patch and how we've discovered that there's a lot of trash in it and how we need people to come help us clean and recycle the trash and do things like that. And so their stories were really, really fun. A lot of them just explained why we needed to do that, but a lot of other kids wrote in there a time for us to get together to help clean the pumpkin patch and things like that. And that was really, really neat, I thought. And so that was me. I integrated writing and art into those lessons. But there were other lessons I did for different parts of the plant. And I got this offline, but this is just an example of what we did. This isn't actual student work, but we made paper plates that look just like this after we read the book called Tops and Bottoms. And so this helped students to understand where plants come from and if they're on top of the ground or below the ground, and the different things that they need to survive. And so it took a lot of thought to integrate plants into so many different subjects, but I was able to do it. And I think that overall I have a really great plant unit. And I think that the students really enjoyed it. So that's my unit on plants, and obviously you all in the education department will get the unit at the end when I do my presentation. But I just want to thank you all so much for this experience. There were moments where it was really rough and I cried during student teaching, but I love the students in the class. They taught me so much about myself and my future career as a teacher. And this experience has been absolutely amazing, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I would just like to thank you all for this experience that you have given me, and I very much appreciate it. Thank you.